Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku joined the Guardians of the Galaxy as their youngest hero. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was screaming. That was Izuku Midoriya's first, last, and only coherent thought. The symphony of Armageddon played around him, a cacophony of crumbling concrete, the guttural roars of gigantomachia, and the desperate, ragged shouts of heroes. The air, thick with dust and the metallic tang of blood, was a toxic soup that burned his lungs with every gasping breath. His body was a road map of agony, his bones felt like splintered glass, his muscles shredded wire, and one for all thrummed under his skin like a caged star, a desperate, furious energy with nowhere to go but out. He was running on fumes, on the dregs of a dreg. The battle for the Gunga Mountain Villa had devolved into a sprawling, chaotic war zone, and now, the Paranormal Liberation Front's monstrous trump card was carving a path of destruction straight towards the cities. Every hero, from the top 10 to the rawest sidekicks, was throwing themselves in its path, a desperate, flickering line against an unstoppable tide. Faster! He thought, his mind a frantic buzz of analysis and pain. His legs, braced by the remnants of his costume's support gear, pumped furiously. Float was active, allowing him to bound over chasms of broken earth and long, gravity-defying arcs, but it drained him. Black Whip, lashing out like sentient tendrils of darkness, pulled him forward, anchoring to shattered buildings and uprooted trees to slingshot him across the devastated landscape. Got to keep Shigaraki busy. Got to stop gigantomachia. Got to save, have to save everyone. The mantra was fraying at the edges, worn thin by exhaustion and the sheer, overwhelming scale of the enemy's power. He could see his friends, his mentors, fighting with a desperation that mirrored his own. Bakugo's explosions were thunderous stars in the smoky twilight. Endeavor's flames were a cleansing inferno against the endless tide of villains. But for every one they took down, 3 more seemed to crawl from the woodwork. His eyes, stinging with sweat and grime, scanned the chaos. A flash of silver, a glint of polished carapace. It was the pro-hero Crustle, a man whose quirk gave him a defensive shell as hard as diamond. He was a living shield, currently holding his ground against a dozen low-level villains, protecting a small group of trapped civilians cowering behind a slab of fallen highway. He was a rock, but even rocks could be shattered. From the periphery, a new threat emerged. This one wasn't a powerhouse like Dabi or a monster like Makia. He was wiry, dressed in a garish purple suit, and his face was twisted in a manic grin of someone enjoying the carnage far too much. His hands shimmered with an unstable, oily light, like a heat haze over asphalt. Deku's mind, the encyclopedic vault of quirk knowledge, flickered. Villain name, Glimmer. Quirk, spatial warp. Unstable, short-range teleportation. High risk of collateral damage due to dimensional shearing. He tears holes in space more than he creates doorways. Glimmer's shimmering hands were aimed directly at Crustle. He wasn't trying to kill the hero. He was trying to remove him from the equation, to banish him from the battlefield and leave the civilians exposed. The air in front of the villain began to buckle and distort. A swirling vortex of fractured light that smelled of ozone and something deeply, fundamentally wrong. There was no time for a plan. No time for a proper St. Louis smash. There was only instinct. Get back! Deku roared, his voice raw. He pushed one for all to a place beyond pain, to a realm of pure, incandescent purpose. 45%. The power screamed up his arms, green lightning cracking around him, turning the very air electric. He was a comet, a blur of green and black, crossing the 100-meter distance in a heartbeat. Crustle turned, his eyes wide with surprise behind his helmet. Midoriya? Deku didn't answer. He slammed into the larger hero's side, a full-body check that sent the heavily armored man skidding a dozen feet away, out of the warp's direct path. The civilian screamed as Deku took his place, planting his iron-soled boots into the cracked earth, a defiant green spark against the encroaching void. He had meant to leap away. He had meant to dodge. But the warp, unstable and violent, didn't just appear, it erupted. It lashed out, a tendril of non-space snagging his arm. A new kind of pain, sharp and cold and absolute, shot through him. It wasn't like a broken bone or a torn muscle. It was the feeling of being unmade. The world dissolved into a sickening lurch. The screaming of the war, the roar of gigantomachia, the scent of smoke, it all twisted into a single, high-pitched whine and then vanished. He was being pulled. Blackwhip shot out on instinct, latching onto a twisted piece of rebar, but the metal groaned and tore from its concrete housing. He was being reeled in. He could see the battlefield through the shimmering tear, a warped, fish-eye lens view of his world. He saw Bakugo turn, his face a mask of shock and rage, a name forming on his lips. He saw Shigaraki, from his perch on Gigantomachia's back, pause and look towards the strange disturbance with detached curiosity. Then, the hole flexed. It widened with a soundless roar, a violent spasm of reality itself, and pulled him through. The world he knew, the world he had fought and bled to protect, snapped shut behind him like a camera's iris. And then, there was only the scream of falling through everything. It was not a fall through the air, but a fall through existence. Colors that had no names bled into one another. Shapes that defied geometry twisted and folded around him. He felt his body stretch and compress, pulled like taffy by impossible tidal forces. The G-forces were immense, crushing the air from his lungs, but there was no air to be had. The sound was the shriek of a dying universe, a cosmic dial-up tone that vibrated through his very atoms. He tumbled through a kaleidoscope of shattered stars and bleeding nebulae. He saw glimpses, fractions of a second, of other places. A world of crystalline trees under a binary sun, a gas giant swirling with storms the size of his home planet. A fleet of silent, obsidian ships drifting in a dead system. These weren't memories. They were the universe itself, flashing past his eyes as he was dragged, unwillingly, through its cosmic bloodstream. His mind, trained to analyze and adapt, tried to find a foothold, a single point of logic in the madness. But there was none. This wasn't a quirk he could understand or counter. This was physics being put in a blender. All he could do was hold on, clenching his fist so hard he felt the bones in his fingers grind together, as if he could physically anchor himself to his own reality. And then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. He was spat out into silence. The transition was so abrupt, so absolute, it was more violent than the journey itself. One moment, he was in a storm of everything. The next, he was in a void of nothing. The silence was the first thing that truly terrified him. It was a perfect, pressing blackness that was not merely the absence of sound, but a presence in itself. He could hear nothing but the frantic, ragged rasp of his own breathing through his mask's respirator, and the frantic thumping of his own heart. He was tumbling, end over end, in an infinite stardusted abyss. Below him, or was it above him, was a majestic, swirling nebula of violet and gold, a celestial cloud so vast it dwarfed any concept of scale he had ever known. Stars, sharp and brilliant and utterly alien, were scattered across the black velvet like diamond dust. There was no ground, no sky, no up or down. Just him, and the endless, silent, terrifying beauty of it all. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced the veil of his shock. He tried to activate float, but it did nothing. There was no gravity to negate, nothing to push off of. He lashed out with Blackwhip, the dark tendrils whipping through the vacuum, searching for an anchor that didn't exist. They found nothing. They flailed uselessly in the void. Oxygen, his mind screamed. A red light began to flash on the inside of his visor. O2 levels, 12% critical. The suit, tattered and torn from the battle, was not designed for this. The cold was beginning to seep in, a deep, penetrating chill that went straight to his bones. He could feel ice crystals forming on the outside of his visor, obscuring the impossible view. His world had been reduced to a flashing red light and the growing tightness in his chest. This was it. This was how it ended. Not in a blaze of glory fighting for his friends, not sacrificing himself to stop Shigaraki, but here, alone, a forgotten speck of dust in an unknown corner of creation. He thought of his mom, of her smile and her tears, of the promise he made to come home. He thought of All Might, of the immense weight of the legacy he was now failing. He thought of Uraraka, Ida, Todoroki, Kaken, all of them, fighting a war he had just been ripped away from. He had failed them. He had failed everyone. The red light on his HUD blinked slower. O2 levels 3%. His movements became sluggish. The cold was no longer a pain, but a deep, heavy numbness. His vision began to tunnel, the brilliant stars blurring into faint smudges of light. A single, crystalline tear escaped his eye, freezing instantly on his cheek. His last conscious thought was not of a hero, but of a boy. A quirkless, crying boy who just wanted to save people with a smile. He closed his eyes and let the darkness take him. I'm telling you, Rocket, no one wants to listen to fooled around and fell in love for the 7th time in a row. Peter Quill's voice, filtered through the Benatar's Tinicom system, was a mixture of exasperation and genuine offense. It's a classic, sure, but it's a slow jam. We just outran a squadron of Kree purists. We need something with a little more punch. A little more cherry bomb. From the pilot's seat, Rocket Raccoon didn't even bother to look back. His paws moved deftly over the holographic console, his whiskers twitching with irritation. I'm not listening to it, you moron. I've got it on a loop to drown you out. It's either that or I wire the comms directly into the weapons array, and we see how your Zune holds up against a plasma cannon. You wouldn't dare touch my Zune. Try me, Hume. In the back of the cockpit, Gamora sat sharpening her Godslayer sword with a whetstone, the rhythmic shing-shing-shing a counterpoint to the bickering. She hadn't said a word in an hour, her expression a mask of stoic patience that had been honed by years of enduring this exact brand of idiocy. Your musical selections are often melancholic, Quill. Drax the Destroyer boomed from his seat, not looking up from polishing his knives with far more vigor than necessary. They speak of lost love and romantic betrayal. Are you perhaps sad? I'm not sad, Drax. I'm trying to set a vibe. A victorious, we just got away with the loot vibe. Quill threw his hands up, his red leather jacket creaking. The loot in question was a crate of substandard power cells they were meant to be delivering to a mining colony on Xander's moon, a job that paid just enough to cover fuel and their bar tab for the next week. It was hardly the stuff of legend. I am Groot. A small, reedy voice chirped from a corner where the small, sapling-like creature was engrossed in a handheld video game, its tiny wooden fingers mashing buttons with intense focus. See? Groot gets it, Quill said, pointing a finger at the tiny guardian. He said he hopes a meteorite hits the cockpit so he can have some peace and quiet. Rocket translated without missing a beat. Did not. Did too. It was just another Tuesday for the Guardians of the Galaxy. They were adrift in a quiet sector of space, the job done, the danger, mostly, past, and the long, boring hours of interstellar travel stretching out before them. Suddenly, a sharp, insistent ping echoed through the cockpit. A flashing yellow alert appeared on Rocket's main screen. Huh! The raccoon muttered, his argument with Quill instantly forgotten. He leaned closer, his nose almost touching the display. Well, that ain't right. What is it? Kree catch up to us? Gamora asked, her hand never ceasing its work on her blade. Nah, not a ship, Rocket said, his fingers flying across the console, pulling up detailed sensor logs. Long-range sensors are picking up an energy signature. A weird one. And it's close. Quill leaned between the two pilot seats. Weird how? Like weird alien probe or weird cosmic horror that's gonna eat the ship? Weird like. I've never seen anything like it, Rocket admitted, a rare note of genuine scientific curiosity in his voice. He magnified the readings. A series of complex graphs and numbers filled the screen. It's biological. Definitely biological. But it's putting out energy on a scale that's impossible. It's fluctuating, but the peaks are like a damn microreactor. And it's just floating out there, in the middle of nowhere. Perhaps it is a space whale, Drax offered helpfully. They are known for their powerful digestive energies. It's not a space whale, you pebble, Rocket snapped. The mass is all wrong. It's tiny. Person-sized. He switched the view to the forward scanner, zooming in on a set of coordinates. The screen resolved into a view of the starfield ahead. At first, there was nothing. Then, Rocket enhanced the image, filtering for the specific energy frequency. A tiny point of light appeared, glowing with a soft, emerald luminescence. It was faint, but it was there, leaving a wispy trail of green particles behind it like a fading comet. I am Groot? Groot asked, finally looking up from his game, his large, dark eyes curious. Yeah, I see it too, buddy, Quill said, squinting. What the hell is that? It's our energy source, Rocket said, his voice now laced with a greedy sort of excitement. Whatever it is, it's leaking that energy into the vacuum. Fascinating. Let's get closer. He nudged the ship's controls, and the Benatar began to drift silently towards the anomaly. As they drew nearer, the image on the screen grew clearer. The point of light resolved into a shape, a humanoid shape, clad in some kind of tattered green and black material. It was tumbling slowly, a frozen, silent figure in the endless night. The cockpit fell silent. The bickering, the music, the sharpening of blades, all of it ceased. Is that a kid? Quill's voice was barely a whisper. The nonchalant bravado was gone, replaced by a deep, resonant shock. The sight of a child-sized figure, helpless and adrift in the one place you should never be, struck a raw, personal nerve deep inside him. He was 8 years old again, staring out a window at the blackness, stolen from his world. Gamora was on her feet, her hand now resting on the hilt of her sword for an entirely different reason. Her eyes, the eyes of the deadliest woman in the galaxy, were narrowed. It could be a trap, a lure set by pirates, with a power source that could run this rust bucket for a year? Unlikely, Rocket countered, though he didn't sound as certain anymore. But she's right. Could be anything. A Zeronian morph, maybe, or a Kree bioweapon. He ran another scan, this time focusing on life signs. A small, bleak icon popped up. Life signs critical. Failing. He is not well camouflaged, Drax observed, stating the obvious. His green attire makes him highly visible against the blackness of space. He's dying, Drax, Quill said, his voice tight. He looked at Rocket. We gotta bring him in. Bring him in? Rocket whirled around in his chair. Are you nuts? We don't know what he is. He's leaking some kind of crazy energy. What if he wakes up and blows a hole in the hull? What if it's contagious? What if he's got space cooties? He's a kid, Rocket. He's a high-energy anomaly that could get us all killed. The smart play is to observe from a distance, maybe scoop up some of those energy particles for study. I am Groot, Groot said, his voice firm and uncharacteristically insistent. He pointed a twiggy finger at the screen, his expression one of clear distress. Don't you start, Rocket warned, pointing back. Quill looked from the desperate raccoon to the dying figure on the screen. He thought of his mother. He thought of Ego. He thought of the family he'd cobbled together in this madhouse of a ship. They didn't leave people behind. It wasn't what they did. Not anymore. Gamora? He asked, his voice quiet. She stared at the screen for a long moment, her gaze analytical. She saw the tattered costume, the strangely shaped mask, the unnatural way the limbs were splayed. It spoke of a battle, a violent and desperate one. Then the scanner zoomed in on the figure's arms, where the costume was ripped. She could see pale skin beneath, cross-hatched with a network of thick, ugly scars. These were not the marks of an easy life. This was not a lure. This was a survivor. His life signs are failing, she said, her voice decisive. If he is a threat, he is a dying one. We bring him aboard. We put him in the medbay's containment field. If he proves hostile, I will deal with him. Rocket threw his paws up in surrender. Fine. Fine. Go ahead and adopt every stray in the galaxy. But if he melts through the floor and eats all my prosthetic legs, I'm blaming you. Just get him, Rocket, Quill ordered, his eyes fixed on the screen. With a final, theatrical grumble, Rocket turned back to the controls. He skillfully maneuvered the Benatar until it was hovering just a few dozen meters from the floating boy. Engaging tractor beam. Gently, a soft blue light emanated from the underside of the ship, enveloping the figure. It stopped its slow tumble and began to drift smoothly towards the open cargo bay doors. As the boy passed by the cockpit's viewport, they got their first clear look at him. He was young. Terribly young. His face, visible through the cracked and frosted visor, was pale and peaceful, with a dusting of freckles across his cheeks. His hair was a wild, untamable mop of dark green. His costume was bizarre, with large, rabbit ear-like appendages on the cowl, and was clearly designed for function, not fashion. It was ripped and scorched in a dozen places. The green lightning that had been crackling around him had faded to a faint, intermittent flicker, a dying ember. He was just a kid. A broken, lost kid. As the cargo bay doors hissed shut, sealing them inside with their strange new passenger, a heavy silence once again fell over the cockpit. The argument over the music felt like it had happened a lifetime ago. Quill let out a slow breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Okay," he said to the room, and to himself. "Okay. Let's see what we've got." The Benatar's medbay was less a sanctuary of healing and more Rocket's personal laboratory of questionable ethics. Wires snaked across the floor, spare cybernetic parts lay disassembled on trays, and the main diagnostic bed was surrounded by a formidable array of scanners, injectors, and laser cutters that looked more like tools of interrogation than medicine. They had placed the boy on that bed. The internal atmosphere of the ship was slowly, carefully warming his near-frozen body. They had managed to retract his strange mask, revealing his youthful face fully. Quill guessed he couldn't be more than 16. Rocket was in his element, buzzing around the console, his goggles perched on his forehead. Fascinating. His cellular structure is Terran standard, but it's hyperconductive. The energy seems to be stored in his very DNA, coiled up like a spring. And these scars, he muttered, bringing up a 3D scan of the boy's arms. Repeated massive trauma? The bone density in his arms is off the charts, like they've been shattered and healed dozens of times, each time coming back stronger. He's been put through a meat grinder. Gamora stood by the entrance, her arms crossed, her skepticism warring with a flicker of pity. He is a child soldier. It wasn't a question. She knew the look. She had worn it herself for years. Or a failed experiment, Rocket added, not looking up from his scans. Whatever he is, he's one of a kind. Quill stood by the boy's bedside, a troubled look on his face. He watched the slow rise and fall of the kid's chest. He looked so ordinary, so fragile, lying there amidst the cold, alien technology. He reached out and brushed a shard of ice from the boy's wild green hair. "What are you doing?" Gamora's voice was sharp. "He's just a kid," Quill said softly. "He's from Terra, Rocket." "You're sure?" 100%. Rocket confirmed. "DNA matches the baseline Terran profile we have on file for you. Which means he's a long, long way from home. Even farther than you were." The thought sent another chill down Quill's spine. How did a teenager from Earth end up floating in deep space on the other side of the galaxy? Drax, who had been observing silently until now, pointed a thick finger at the boy's face. "His facial markings are unusual. Like small, dark spots." "Is it a disease?" "They're called freckles, Drax." Quill sighed, not taking his eyes off the boy. "It's a human thing. I am Groot," Groot said from Quill's shoulder, where he'd climbed for a better view. He reached out a tiny twig hand and gently poked the boy's cheek. As the boy's core temperature continued to rise, reaching a stable, healthy level, the faint green energy that clung to him began to stir. It started as a subtle hum, a low thrumming that vibrated through the metal deck plates of the medbay. Rocket's head snapped up from his console. "Whoa! Energy levels are spiking. His body is rebooting." On the bed, Deku's fingers twitched. A soft groan escaped his lips. The green aura around him intensified, no longer a faint flicker but a steady, vibrant glow. Thin, elegant arcs of emerald lightning began to crawl over his skin, dancing from his fingertips to his shoulders. "Rocket, what's happening?" Quill asked, taking an involuntary step back. "I don't know. His metabolism is going into overdrive. His cells are generating power at an exponential rate," Rocket yelled, frantically typing at his console. "It's like his body is trying to heal and defend itself at the same time." The lights in the medbay began to flicker. The low hum escalated into a powerful, resonant thrum that made their teeth ache. The lightning around Deku grew brighter, wilder, casting the room in a strobing green light. The machinery in the base sparked and sputtered, overloaded by the raw energy radiating from the boy. "Containment field! Now!" Gamora shouted, drawing her sword as she moved to put herself between the others and the bed. Rocket slammed a large red button on the console. A shimmering, transparent wall of energy was supposed to materialize around the bed. Instead, It flickered violently for a second and then died with a pathetic fizzle. "It's no good!" Rocket shrieked. "He's putting out too much juice! He's shorting out the ship's systems!" Throughout the Benatar, lights browned out. Alarms began to blare, a chaotic symphony of emergency alerts. The entire ship shuddered as its power grid fluctuated wildly. In the med bay, the phenomenon reached its crescendo. A final, blinding pulse of emerald light erupted from Deku's body. It wasn't an explosion, but a wave of pure power that washed over the room. It was warm, vibrant, and felt less like an attack and more like a desperate, unconscious cry for help. Quill shielded his eyes, Gamora braced herself for a blow that never came, and Drax watched, his eyes wide with something akin to awe. He is very bright. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the energy receded. It coiled back into the boy's body, the lightning disappearing, the glow fading, until all that was left was the faint, peaceful hum. The ship's emergency lights kicked on, bathing the room in a dim, red glow. The alarm sputtered into silence. On the bed, Deku slumped back into deep unconsciousness, his breathing now even and steady. He looked, once again, like nothing more than a sleeping teenager. The four guardians stood frozen for a long moment, the only sound the frantic thumping of their own hearts, and the lingering crackle of ozone in the air. They looked at the boy, then at each other, their faces a mixture of shock, fear, and utter disbelief. Rocket was the first to break the silence. He slowly lowered his paws from his console, his eyes wide. "The readings," he whispered, his voice trembling with a scientist's awe. "They were off the scale. I couldn't even measure the peak output. It's like he has a miniature sun inside him." Quill stared at the boy, the strange, powerful, and impossibly lost kid from his own home world. His simple, altruistic act of saving a life had just brought something onto their ship that defied every law of nature they knew. Their routine cargo run had just taken a very, very sharp turn into the unknown. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous energy buzzing through him. "Okay," he said, his voice barely a croak. "So what the hell did we just pick up?" The first thing to penetrate the deep, dreamless abyss of Izuku Midoriya's unconsciousness was a sound. It was a soft, rhythmic beeping, steady and calm. For a fleeting, hopeful moment, it felt familiar. It was the sound of a hospital, the sound of Recovery Girl's office, the sound of waking up battered but safe after a brutal training exercise or a villain encounter. He clung to that familiarity, using it as a rope to pull himself up from the depths. The second thing was the feeling. He was warm, a deep, pervasive warmth that chased away the memory of the absolute, bone-freezing cold. He was lying on a surface that was firm but not uncomfortable. The air tasted clean, sterile, with a faint, unidentifiable metallic tang. "I'm alive," he thought, the realization a slow, dawning sunrise in his mind. "The warp, it didn't kill me. I'm in a hospital. Did they win?" Is Shigaraki. His eyes fluttered open. The ceiling was not the familiar sterile white of a hospital room. It was a dark, gunmetal gray, crisscrossed with thick bundles of glowing orange cables and exposed conduits. The rhythmic beeping wasn't coming from a heart monitor, but from a complex, holographic display that hovered in the air beside him, cycling through lines of angular, alien script he couldn't begin to decipher. The room wasn't a room. It was a compartment, cluttered with bizarre tools, cybernetic limbs hanging from hooks, and technology that looked more advanced and chaotic than anything Mei Hatsum could dream up in her wildest caffeine-fueled fever dream. Panic, cold and immediate, seized him. This was not Japan. This was not Earth. He tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness and a deep, full-body ache pushed him back down. Every muscle screamed in protest. He felt drained, hollowed out, the way he always did after pushing one for all too far. Then he saw them. Standing in the doorway, observing him, was a gallery of the impossible. A towering, gray-skinned man covered in intricate red tattoos, built like a mountain of muscle. A green-skinned woman with piercing, intelligent eyes, her posture radiating a dangerous grace. A raccoon, standing on its hind legs, wearing some kind of orange jumpsuit and holding a device that looked suspiciously like a weapon. And on the gray man's shoulder, a tiny creature that looked like a walking, sentient twig, its large black eyes blinking at him with open curiosity. Izuku's breath hitched. His heart hammered against his ribs. Villains? Nomu? A new kind of heteromorph quirk? His mind raced, cataloging threats, assessing his own condition. He was weak, his quirk reserves dangerously low. His costume was still on but felt stiff and strange. He had to get up, had to fight, had to. A voice cut through his panic, smooth and laced with a casual confidence. Whoa, easy there, spaceman. You're safe. Well, safe is a strong word on this ship, but we're not gonna hurt you. The voice belonged to a man who had just entered the room, stepping in front of the others. He was human, or at least he looked human. He wore a red leather jacket and had an easygoing, roguish air about him. He held his hands up in a universal gesture of peace. The words, however, were gibberish. A stream of sounds that held no meaning, like a radio tuned to a dead station. Deku stared, his confusion mounting. He's not getting it, Quill! The raccoon's voice chittered. It was another burst of meaningless sound, high-pitched and gravelly. The translator must not have fully bonded yet, the human-looking man, Quill, sighed. Give it a second. It's top-of-the-line Ravager tech. Mostly. As if on cue, Deku felt a tiny, sharp sting at the base of his neck. He flinched, his hand flying to the spot. His fingers brushed against a small, metallic disc he hadn't felt before. As his skin made contact with it, a strange, tingling sensation spread through him, a wave of pins and needles that washed up into his skull and then vanished. Quill spoke again. Hey, you with us? Can you understand me now? This time, the words were not gibberish. They were perfect, unaccented Japanese, clear as a bell in his mind. Deku's eyes widened, his mind reeling from the impossible transition. One moment, alien babble. The next, perfect understanding. How? He whispered, his voice hoarse, unused. How am I understanding you? Quill grinned, a flash of charm. Little thingamajig we stuck in your neck. Universal translator. Nasty little needle, but it gets the job done. Translates brainwaves associated with language into a format you can understand, and vice versa. So, what's your name, kid? Deku's mind was a whirlwind. A universal translator? Brainwaves? This technology was beyond anything he knew. He was so far from home. The reality of it was a physical weight pressing down on him, but they hadn't attacked. They had saved him. His hero instincts, buried under layers of fear and confusion, began to surface. He slowly, painfully, pushed himself into a sitting position on the edge of the medbay bed. He looked at the assembled group, his gaze wary but no longer panicked. My name is Izuku Midoriya, he said, his voice gaining a little strength. He then added, out of habit, my hero name is Deku. The raccoon snorted, a sound of pure derision. Deku? What kind of a name is that? Sounds like something you scrape off the bottom of your shoe, Rocket. The green woman, Gamora, warned, her tone low and sharp. What? I'm just saying, I am Groot. The small tree person said softly. Yes, I know it means you can do it now. He hasn't told us that yet, you're ruining the bit. Rocket snapped at the twig. Deku blinked, completely lost. He focused on Quill, who seemed to be the leader. He had to explain, had to make them understand. They were his only hope of getting back. Please, he began, his voice earnest and desperate. You have to help me. I need to get back. There's a war, a villain named Tamura Shigaraki. He's trying to destroy everything. My friends, my teachers, they're all still fighting. I was pulled away by a villain's quirk. I have to go back. He spoke quickly, the words tumbling out of him in a frantic rush, the ingrained urgency of the battlefield still thrumming in his veins. He looked at their faces, searching for a sign of understanding, but all he saw was a collection of blank, confused stares. Quill held up a hand. Whoa, slow down there, Mighty Mouse. A quirk? Yes, a quirk, Deku said, leaning forward. A superpower. Like me. This power. He held up his hand, and though it took a monumental effort, he managed to summon a tiny flicker of one for all. A few faint, green sparks danced around his scarred fingers. This is my quirk. In my world, about 80% of the population is born with some kind of special ability. We have heroes, licensed professionals who use their quirks to fight villains and save people. I'm a student at UA High School, the top hero academy. I was fighting alongside the pros in the Paranormal Liberation War when he trailed off, realizing his explanation was only deepening their confusion. Rocket leaned forward, his beady eyes gleaming with an intense, analytical light. The derision was gone, replaced by a scientist's rapacious curiosity. Wait, back up. Did you say 80% of your planet's population has superpowers? Spontaneously generated, genetically encoded, unique abilities? Yes, that's right, Deku said, nodding eagerly. Finally, someone was getting it. Fascinating! Rocket scurried closer, pulling up a holographic interface from his wrist gauntlet. And this one for all of yours. Your little light show in here earlier caused a system-wide power surge that nearly fried my NAV computer. The energy signature is unlike anything I've ever seen. It's not cosmic, not mystical, not purely technological. It's biological, but it violates the laws of thermodynamics. How does it work? What's the energy source? Is it a form of cellular metabolism? Does it draw from a pocket dimension? What are the biophysical specifications? Deku stared at the talking raccoon, utterly baffled by the barrage of technical questions. It's a sacred torch. A power passed down from one person to the next, growing stronger with each generation. It's the crystallization of power. Rocket threw his paws up in the air. That's not a scientific explanation. That's a tagline from a bad commercial. Kid, I'm trying to understand the mechanics of a force that could power a small moon, and you're giving me poetry. It is not poetry, it is the truth. Deku insisted, feeling flustered. Quill stepped between them, playing peacemaker. Okay, let's dial it back. So, your world is full of people like the X-Men? Or the Avengers? Deku tilted his head. The who? Quill's face fell. The Avengers? You know. Captain America? Iron Man? Thor? He looked at Deku's blank expression. Seriously? Nothing? How about Footloose? The greatest movie of all time? Kevin Bacon? Who is Kevin Bacon? Deku asked, his confusion reaching a new peak. Quill looked physically wounded. He turned to Gamora. He doesn't know who Kevin Bacon is. His whole planet is full of superheroes, and they've never even heard of the Avengers. This is a tragedy. The tall, gray man, Drax, who had been watching the exchange with a deeply furrowed brow, finally spoke. His voice was a low, rumbling bass. You speak of a symbol of peace. You called him All Might. Deku's face lit up, a wave of reverence washing over his features. Yes. All Might. He was the greatest hero of all time. The number one. He could change the weather with a single punch. He saved countless people with a smile. He was the pillar that held up our society. Drax nodded slowly, as if processing a complex philosophical concept. I see. So this All Might is a weapon of immense destructive power, and his smile is a form of psychological warfare used to intimidate his enemies before he obliterates them. No! That's not it at all! Deku sputtered, horrified. The smile is to reassure people. To let them know that everything is going to be okay because he is here, a distinction without a difference. Drax concluded, looking satisfied with his analysis. Deku felt a headache beginning to form behind his eyes. This was impossible. They were speaking the same language, but they weren't communicating at all. It was like trying to explain the color blue to someone who had never had sight. Their entire frame of reference was fundamentally different from his. Gamora, who had been silent and watchful, finally stepped forward. She folded her arms, her gaze sharp and cutting, stripping away all the noise and confusion. You said you were in a war, she stated, her voice calm and direct. You were fighting. You are a child. Her words hit him harder than any of Rocket's technical questions or Quill's bizarre references. The simple, brutal truth of it silenced him. I had to fight, he said, his voice dropping. The frantic energy drained out of him, replaced by a profound weariness. Shigaraki, he can decay anything he touches. He has multiple quirks. He's a monster. If we didn't stop him, he would have killed everyone. I have to get back. Can you help me get back to my planet? He looked up at them, his green eyes pleading, the eyes of a lost child beneath the hardened exterior of a young soldier. Please! My home, it's called Earth. A strange, heavy silence fell over the room. Quill exchanged a look with Gamora, an expression of pity and dread crossing his face. Rocket stopped fiddling with his console. Even Drax seemed to sense the shift in the atmosphere. Kid, Quill began, his voice softer now, all the bravado gone. You said your power was passed down through generations. How old are we talking? I'm the 9th holder, Deku said. One for all is over 100 years old. Quill ran a hand through his hair, looking stressed. Okay. 100 years. And you've never heard of the Kree? The Skrulls? The Nova Empire? Deku just shook his head, his confusion returning. Right, Quill said, letting out a long, slow breath. He clapped his hands together once, a decisive sound that echoed in the quiet room. Okay. Field trip. Come on, kid. There's something you need to see. Quill led Deku out of the med bay and through the ship's narrow, utilitarian corridors. Deku walked with a slight limp, his body still protesting every movement. He looked around, taking in the exposed wiring, the scuffed metal walls, and the occasional strange piece of tech bolted to the bulkhead. The entire ship had a lived-in, chaotic feel, like a bachelor pad that could travel faster than light. They entered the cockpit, a cramped space dominated by 2 pilot chairs and a large viewport showing an endless, breathtaking panorama of stars. The violet and gold nebula he'd seen before he passed out was visible off to the side, a majestic celestial painting. Take a seat, Quill said, gesturing to a spare seat behind the pilots. Deku sat, his eyes glued to the window. He had seen the stars from his bedroom window his whole life, but this was different. There was no atmospheric haze, no city lights to wash them out. They were sharp, brilliant, and terrifyingly numerous. Okay, Rocket, Quill said, taking the pilot's seat. Show him. Rocket, already in the co-pilot's chair, grumbled something under his breath but complied. He tapped a few commands into the holographic console. The starfield in the main viewport shimmered and was replaced by a 3-dimensional, glowing map. It was a spiral galaxy, rendered in stunning, intricate detail, with billions of tiny points of light, each one a star system. This is the Andromeda Galaxy, Quill said gently. Current location. We're out here in the Perseus Arm pretty quiet sector, all things considered. Deku stared at the map, his heart beginning to pound. It was beautiful, but it was alien. He didn't recognize any of the constellations or landmarks. Where is my solar system? Quill's expression was grim. He looked at Rocket, who manipulated the controls again. The map zoomed out, and out, and out, the magnificent spiral of Andromeda shrinking until it was just one of a dozen bright smudges in a cluster of galaxies. Rocket highlighted one of them, then he zoomed in. A new spiral galaxy filled the screen, this one achingly familiar. Deku recognized the shape of it from his science textbooks. The Orion Spur. The Sagittarius Arm. He felt a surge of desperate hope. That's it! He exclaimed, pointing a trembling finger. That's the Milky Way! My galaxy! Rocket zoomed in further, into a familiar spiral arm, towards a single, unremarkable yellow star. A tiny system of planets resolved around it. The third one was a swirl of blue, white, and green. Home. The sight of it, so clear and so real, brought tears to his eyes. He was so overwhelmed with relief that he almost missed the numbers that appeared at the bottom of the screen. A small line of text indicating the distance between the Benatar's current location and the selected system. Distance, 2.537 million light-years. Deku's blood ran cold. He stared at the number, his brain refusing to process it. It was a number from an astronomy textbook, a theoretical distance, a concept so vast as to be meaningless. It was not supposed to be a measure of how far away he was from his mother's cooking, from his friends, from the war he was supposed to be fighting. No, he whispered, shaking his head in denial. No, that's not possible. Light years, that's a measure of distance, not time. It can't be. It is, kid, Quill said, his voice heavy with a sympathy that was all too real. That villain's quirk, it didn't just teleport you across the street. It punched a hole through, well, through everything. It threw you from your galaxy into ours. The cockpit was silent, save for the low hum of the ship's life support. Deku stared at the little blue marble on the screen, a world away not just by distance, but by the very fabric of reality. The hope that had been flickering within him was extinguished, snuffed out by the cold, hard vacuum of cosmic reality. He wasn't just in another country. He wasn't on another planet in his own system. He was lost in a way that no human in his world's history had ever been lost before. The weight of it crashed down on him. His promise to his mom to come home. His duty as the ninth holder of One for All. The desperate fight his friends were still in the middle of. He could feel it all slipping away, becoming an impossible, unreachable dream. He wasn't just a hero off course. He was a ghost, an echo from another universe. He wrapped his arms around himself, a shudder running through his body that had nothing to do with the cold. The tears that had welled in his eyes now streamed freely down his face. He didn't make a sound, his grief too vast and profound for sobs. He just sat there, in the cockpit of an alien ship, 2.5 million light-years from everything he had ever known and loved, and shattered. Suddenly, a deafening klaxon blared through the ship. Red emergency lights began to flash, washing the cockpit in a crimson glow. A loud, grinding bang echoed from the aft of the ship, and the whole vessel shuddered violently, throwing Deku against his seat. "What the hell was that?" Quill yelled, grabbing the controls. Rocket was already frantically scanning his console, his earlier curiosity replaced with pure, panicked professionalism. "Ah, crap! That's what that was!" The kid's energy burst didn't just cause a surge, it flash-fused the primary coil in the chronosynclastic infundibulum. "We're leaking hypercoolant everywhere. In English, Rocket, the thing that lets us go fast is busted!" Rocket shrieked. "And if that coolant hits the main reactor, we're gonna be a new, very short-lived constellation. I have to shut down the main drive, now!" He slammed his paw down on a series of buttons. The deep, resonant thrum of the ship's engines died with a pathetic whine, and they were suddenly adrift. "Okay," Quill said, his voice tight as he scanned the readouts. "Okay, not exploding is good. Where's the nearest port? The nearest planet? The nearest anything that isn't empty space." Rocket's fingers flew across the NAV computer. "Nearest civilized outpost is... Oh, you gotta be kidding me," he groaned. "Xylos. A junker planetoid in the outer rim. It's a cesspool, Quill. The whole place smells like burnt circuits and regret." "Do they have the part we need?" Gamora asked, her voice calm and steady from the doorway. "Maybe," Rocket conceded. "Xylos has everything if you're willing to trade your dignity and a few non-essential organs for it. But it's our only shot. We're running on auxiliary thrusters. It'll take us a couple of hours to get there." Quill nodded, his jaws set. "All right. Set a course for the cesspool." He glanced back at Deku. The boy hadn't moved. He was still staring at the blank screen where the image of his home had been, tears still silently tracing paths through the grime on his face. The immediate, life-or-death crisis of the ship had barely registered. Quill's heart ached for him. He knew that feeling. The feeling of being the loneliest person in the universe. He turned back to the controls, a new resolve hardening his features. First, fix the ship. Then he would figure out what to do about the broken kid from a lost world. As the Benatar limped slowly through the void towards the grimy promise of Xylos, Izuku Midoriya finally looked up from the screen. His personal apocalypse had been interrupted by a mundane mechanical failure. He wiped his face with the back of his tattered glove, his expression numb. The tears had stopped. In their place was a hollow, desolate emptiness. But beneath that emptiness, a tiny, defiant spark, the ember of the hero who never gave up, refused to be completely extinguished. He had a new mission now. It wasn't about fighting Shigaraki. It wasn't about becoming the symbol of peace. It was simpler, more desperate, and more impossible than anything he had ever faced. He had to get home. And these strange, chaotic, bickering rogues were the only chance he had. The planetoid Xylos was less a world and more a galactic wound that had been allowed to fester. As the Benatar limped into its grimy, smog-choked atmosphere on sputtering auxiliary thrusters, Izuku Midoriya stared out of the cockpit viewport, and felt a profound sense of despair. The surface was a chaotic jumble of towering scrap heaps that scraped the rust-colored sky, mountains of decommissioned starships, dead servitors, and gutted freighter hulls piled one on top of another. A network of precarious catwalks and sputtering anti-grav lifts connected the metallic peaks, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with the haze of leaking coolants and plasma exhaust. It smelled, even through the ship's advanced filtration systems, of ozone, burnt wiring, and a deep, metallic decay. Deku had been quiet for the entire journey. The crushing, astronomical weight of his displacement had settled over him like a physical shroud. He'd replayed the star chart in his mind 1,000 times, the impossible number, 2.537 million light-years, a repeating, silent scream in his thoughts. His friends, his mission, his entire world was a ghost, a faint glimmer in a galaxy he could no longer reach. He felt untethered, a piece of cosmic driftwood. All right, touchdown in the pits. Try not to breathe the air, it'll give you a case of robolung, Quill announced, his voice tight with professional focus as he expertly navigated the crippled ship through a canyon of debris. He set the Benatar down on a landing pad that looked more like a rust-eaten metal plate than a designated port. The moment the engines powered down, the ship was assailed by a cacophony of sounds, the shriek of grinding metal, the babble of a dozen alien languages, and the incessant, percussive clang of hammers on durasteel. Okay, here's the deal, Quill said, swiveling in his chair. Gamora, Drax, you stay here. The pits are full of scavengers who'd love to strip this ship down to its frame. Discourage them, violently if necessary. Drax grinned, a wide, terrifying sight. My fists are eager to engage in discouraging diplomacy. Gamora simply nodded, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. Rocket, you're with me, Quill continued. You know the schematics. We need a Mark IV chronosynclastic infundibulum. Nothing less will do. He then looked back at Deku, who was still staring blankly out the window. Quill's expression softened slightly. Hey, kid. You coming? Deku flinched, pulled from his stupor. Me? Yeah, you, Quill said. Can't leave you here to mope, you'll depress the upholstery. Besides, I want to keep an eye on you. Don't want you accidentally powering up and blowing a hole in another vital component. Deku didn't have the energy to argue. He simply nodded, the motion feeling sluggish and heavy. He followed Quill and Rocket down the exit ramp, Groot perched on his shoulder, and was immediately hit by the full sensory assault of Xylos. The air was thick and oily, and the sheer scale of the junk piles was dizzying. Strange, multi-limbed creatures scurried in the shadows, and hulking, cybernetically enhanced beings hauled massive sheets of metal across the yard. It was a place of desperate survival, a far cry from the ordered society he knew. They found the main parts dealer in a cavernous workshop carved out of the hull of a colossal, ancient warship. The dealer was a four-armed, insectoid creature named Flinks with oily antennae that twitched constantly. He examined the damaged infundibulum Rocket had brought with one set of hands while greedily counting imaginary credits with another. Oh, a Mark IV. Flinks clicked, his voice a series of wet, guttural noises that the universal translator smoothed into slick, condescending prose. Very rare. Very delicate. Damaged beyond repair, this one is. Lucky for you, Flinks has one in stock. Mint condition. Barely used. Just give us the price, you chitinous loan shark. Rocket grumbled. Flinks's antennae twitched in amusement. He tapped a few keys on a grimy console, and a number flashed up on the screen. Quill stared at it. 100,000 units? Are you insane? I could buy my own moon for that price. Supply and demand, Captain. Flinks chittered. You're stranded. I'm the only one on this trash heap with the part you need. The price is the price. Unless, perhaps you're looking for work, Rocket scoffed. Work from you? I'd rather deflee a Zoglian hound with my teeth. Not from me, no, Flinks said, leaning forward conspiratorially. But word travels in the pits. A functionary from the Tyvan group is on nowhere, looking for a discreet acquisitions team. He's paying top unit for a simple retrieval. More than enough to cover your repairs and leave you with heavy pockets. Quill's interest was piqued, despite himself. The Tyvan group? As in, the collector? The very same, Flinks confirmed. The functionary's name is Tarsus Volume. He set up shop at the staggering Gantry Cantina. Looking for a crew with your flexible moral reputation. Quill stroked his chin, the gears turning in his head. It was risky. The collector was not someone you wanted to be indebted to. But 100,000 units was 100,000 units. We'll think about it, Quill said, grabbing the busted part. They turned to leave, the exorbitant price tag hanging in the air like a death sentence. As they walked back towards the ship, Deku finally spoke, his voice quiet. What are we going to do? We can't afford that. That's what we're going to discuss now, Quill said, his tone shifting from frustrated customer to team captain. Back on the Benatar, the mood was grim. It's a simple snatch and grab, Quill explained, pacing the common area. The whole team was assembled, including Deku, who sat awkwardly on a cargo crate, feeling like an outsider eavesdropping on a family meeting. This Tarsus Fall guy claims a rival collector named Silas Kor stole a family heirloom from him, a Kylosian dream gem. He wants us to go to nowhere, break into Kor's private vault, and retrieve it. He pays us, we use the money to pay Flinks, we get off that flying garbage dump. Easy peasy. There is no such thing as easy peasy when the Tyvan group is involved, Gamora countered, her arms crossed. They are ruthless. If we fail, or if we cross them, the collector will mount our heads on his wall. But 150,000 units, Gamora! Rocket chimed in, his eyes gleaming. Think of the upgrades I could do. We could get a multiphasic weapons array. A probability drive. A decent coffee machine. Deku had been listening to this exchange with a growing sense of horror. He finally found his voice, and it was stronger than it had been all day, fueled by a sudden, shocking clarity. Wait, he said, standing up. The others turned to look at him. You're talking about stealing? Breaking into someone's vault? That's a villain's act. Rocket rolled his eyes so hard it looked painful. Oh, here we go. Welcome to the galaxy, kid. It ain't all sunshine and heroic speeches, but it's wrong, Deku insisted, his voice rising with the force of his conviction. Heroes don't steal. We help people. We uphold the law, we don't break it. There has to be another way. We could try to reason with Flinks, or find work helping people. Quill stopped pacing and turned to face him, his expression unreadable. Helping people doesn't pay for a chronosynclastic infundibulum, Deku. Out here, sometimes the lines get a little blurry. You do what you have to do to survive. To keep your ship flying. To keep your family safe. But this isn't right. Deku's hands were clenched into fists at his sides, the old fire of UA's most passionate student returning to his eyes. He felt like he was back in a classroom ethics debate, but the stakes were terrifyingly real. We'd be no better than the villains I fight back home. This was it. The fundamental disconnect. The clash of two entirely different philosophies, forged in two entirely different worlds. Quill took a deep breath and walked over to the boy, placing a hand on his shoulder. Deku flinched but didn't pull away. Listen to me, kid, Quill said, his voice low and serious, all the usual humor stripped away. I get it. Back on your Earth you have rules. Black and white. Good guys and bad guys. Out here, it's mostly just shades of gray. You think we like doing this stuff? I was a thief for most of my life. A ravager. It's not a path I'd recommend. But we've saved the galaxy. Twice. And you know how we did it? By being the guys willing to break the rules the good guys won't. Sometimes you gotta do a little bad to do a whole lot of good. Right now, the good is getting our ship fixed so we can get the hell out of here and be in a position to help people if they need it. This job, it's just a means to an end. It's the nowhere method. You do what it takes. Deku stared at him, his mind reeling. A little bad to do a whole lot of good. It was a tempting, dangerous piece of logic. He thought of the morally gray decisions heroes back home had to make, the necessary evils of espionage and infiltration employed by hawks. But this felt different. This was just theft for personal gain. I can't, he whispered, shaking his head. I'm not asking you to, Quill said gently. But I am asking you to come with us. Stick with me, watch our backs, and see how it's done. If at any point you think we're crossing a real line, hurting innocent people, you can call us on it. Deal? Deku looked around the room. At Rocket, who just wanted to fix his ship. At Gamora, whose stoic face betrayed a deep-seated pragmatism. At Drax, who looked to Quill for guidance. This was their way. It wasn't his, but he was on their ship, a refugee in their world. He had no other choice. He gave a slow, reluctant nod. Deal. But I'm only observing. And if anyone is in danger of getting hurt, I'm stepping in. Quill grinned, the familiar roguish charm returning. That's the spirit. All right, Guardians. Let's go steal a shiny rock. Nowhere was a sensory overload that made Xylos look like a quiet suburb. The fact that he was standing inside the severed, hollowed-out head of an ancient, godlike celestial being was a concept so mind-boggling that Deku's brain could barely process it. The place was a riot of color, sound, and life. Bioluminescent fungi pulsed with soft light on the organic-looking walls, and strange, viscous fluids dripped from the ceiling into collection vats. The streets, if they could be called that, were a chaotic, jostling mass of beings from 1,000 different species, a living, breathing encyclopedia of alien biology. The air hummed with the energy of a lawless port, a place where fortunes were made and lives were lost in the span of a single drink. Tarsus Val was exactly as oily as Flinks had described. He was a tall, slender being with pale blue skin and an impeccably tailored suit, and he looked at them with an air of bored superiority from his booth in the dimly lit staggering gantry. He laid out the job with cold, corporate efficiency. Silas Core is an art dealer of ill repute who keeps his private collection in a high-security vault beneath his establishment, the Gilded Nebula. Val explained, sipping a bubbling, iridescent drink. The Kylosian Dream Gem is in display case 7. The vault is protected by a standard electrolock, a pressure-sensitive floor, and a squad of 8 Regelian security guards. I trust this will not be problematic for professionals of your caliber. Nothing we can't handle, Quill said with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. Half the pay up front, half on delivery. Val gave a thin smile and slid a credit chip across the table. As you wish. Do try not to make a mess. The collector values subtlety. With the plan in place, they made their way to the Gilded Nebula. It was a classier establishment than the gantry, a high-stakes casino and bar that catered to a wealthier, more dangerous clientele. The air was thick with the scent of expensive alien liquor and the low murmur of high-stakes gambling. Okay, here's the plan, Quill whispered as they huddled near the entrance. I'll cause a distraction at the trash chuck table. Loud, obnoxious, maybe accuse someone of cheating. While everyone's watching me, Rocket, you get to the nearest terminal and slice into the security system. Disable the floor plates and the lock on the vault door for exactly 60 seconds. Gamora, Drax, that's your window. You move fast, you get the gem. Deku, you stay with me. You're the lookout. You see anything, you give the signal. He pointed to his ear. We're all on comms. Let's do this. Deku's heart was pounding. This felt wrong on every level. He was about to be an accomplice to a crime. He watched as the others slipped into their roles. Quill swaggered over to the gaming table, a loud-mouthed Terran looking for trouble. Rocket, small and easily overlooked, scurried towards a service panel. Gamora and Drax melted into the shadows near a corridor marked private. It started well. Quill, in a truly masterful performance, managed to offend a hulking, four-eyed alien by questioning the parentage of his gambling pet. The argument escalated beautifully, drawing the attention of half the room, including 2 of the guards. I'm in. Rocket's voice crackled over the comms. Slicing through their firewalls now. Seriously, it's like they're using pre-Kree Empire encryption. Pathetic. Floor plates are down. Vault lock is cycling. Go, go, go. Deku watched as Gamora and Drax slipped down the corridor. He held his breath, his eyes darting around the room, every nerve on fire. He was watching for trouble, but he was also looking for a way out, an excuse for this all to be a misunderstanding. We're at the vault. Gamera's calm voice reported. Doors open. We're in. A minute passed. An eternity. Quill was now standing on the table, singing a slurred sea shanty, much to the fury of the pit boss. It was the perfect distraction. Then, everything went wrong. A series of loud, blaring sirens erupted through the casino. Red emergency lights began to flash. Heavy metal shutters slammed down over the windows and doors, sealing them inside. What was that? Quill yelled over the comms, jumping down from the table. It's a secondary system, Rocket shrieked back. It's not on the network. It's a goddamn biological scanner tied to a silent alarm. It must have registered Drax's cellular density as anomalous. We're made. Guards heading your way, Gamora. Deku's head snapped towards the private corridor. He saw 4 of the Regelian guards, tall, armored beings with insectoid features, brandishing crackling energy batons as they charged towards the vault. 2 more were closing in on Quill, and the final 2 were making their way towards Rocket's position. We have the gem, but we're pinned down. Gamora's voice was tight with exertion. He could hear the clang of metal and the sizzle of energy weapons in the background. Quill pulled out his quad blasters. We're gonna have to shoot our way out. No! Deku's voice was sharp, cutting through the panic. His mind, trained for years to analyze and strategize in seconds, was already working. He wasn't a thief, but he was a hero, and his new friends were in trouble. His promise to not get involved went out the window the moment lethal force became an option. Don't shoot, he said into his calm, his eyes darting around the room, taking in every detail. The guards are clustered. Their armor is heavy, it'll slow them down. Rocket, the power conduit for the gaming tables. Can you overload it? Yeah, probably. Why? Just do it, Deku yelled. He turned to Quill. The floor here, it's a raised decorative panel. It's not solid. Give me cover. Quill didn't understand, but he heard the authority in the kid's voice. You heard him, Rocket! Fry it! He started firing his blasters at the ceiling, creating a shower of sparks that made the guards heading for him duck and weave. Deku took a deep breath, planting his feet. He channeled one for all into his legs and right arm, the familiar green energy crackling to life. He wasn't aiming for a person. He was aiming for the environment. This wasn't a hero's smash. It was a strategist's move. Conduit overloaded! Rocket yelled. The lights on the gaming tables flickered violently, and then exploded in a shower of harmless, blindingly bright sparks, creating a massive, disorienting flashbang effect. At that exact moment, Deku dropped into a low stance. Delaware smash! 5%! He didn't punch. He flicked his fingers, unleashing a precise, controlled burst of air pressure directly at the floor panel beneath the feet of the 4 guards charging the vault. The panel buckled and cracked, not enough to seriously injure, but enough to shatter their footing. They stumbled and fell, a clumsy, tangled pile of armor and limbs, completely disoriented by the flash and the unstable ground. Before they could recover, Deku was moving. Black Whip, dark and swift, erupted from his arms. The tendrils didn't strike or crush. They moved with surgical precision. One tendril wrapped around the guards' energy batons, yanking them from their grasp and flinging them across the room. Another set of tendrils shot out and wrapped around their legs, binding them together. A final tendril snaked out and slapped the emergency door release panel next to the corridor, and the vault's blast door, which had begun to close, hissed back open. It was over in 3 seconds. 4 guards were disarmed, immobilized, and utterly bewildered. From the corridor, Gamora and Drax emerged. Gamora was holding the glowing blue gem. She stopped dead, staring at the scene. She saw the tangled guards, the sizzling floor panel, and Deku, standing in the middle of it all, green lightning fading from his form, his expression one of fierce, focused concentration. She had expected a clumsy, powerful wrecking ball. She had not expected this. This was control. This was tactics. This was impressive. Well, Drax boomed, looking at the trussed-up guards. His method of incapacitation is both efficient and theatrical. I approve. Let's go! Quill yelled, grabbing Deku by the arm and pulling him towards the exit, which the final 2 guards had abandoned to help their friends. They sprinted out of the casino just as the main shutters began to rise, melting into the chaotic crowds of nowhere. The handover with Tarsus Vaal was tense. He took the dream gem, inspecting it with a jeweler's loupe. Excellent, he said with his thin smile. The collector will be pleased. As Vaal was about to transfer the final payment, Deku, feeling emboldened, spoke up. That gem, It must mean a lot to your family. Val paused and looked at him, a flicker of genuine confusion on his face. He then let out a short, dry laugh. Family? My boy, this isn't an heirloom. It's a power source. Kailosian dream gems can amplify the psionic field of a telepath 1,000-fold. It's exceedingly rare. Silas Core was a competitor, not a thief. I simply employed a more direct acquisition strategy than he did. He transferred the credits and walked away without a backward glance, leaving Deku standing there, the weight of Quill's words, shades of gray, settling on him like a shroud. They hadn't been heroes recovering stolen property. They had been corporate raiders, muscle for a callous collector. The victory felt dirty hollow. They fixed the ship and left the grime of Xylos behind, the new infundibulum humming perfectly. Back in the familiar space of the Benatar, a heavy silence hung between them. Deku sat by himself in the common area, staring at his scarred hands. Gamora walked over and stood before him. He looked up, expecting a lecture. Instead, she just looked at him, her expression uncharacteristically open. What you did back there? She said, her voice even. It was not the act of a brute. It was the act of a soldier. A smart one. You chose to incapacitate rather than kill. You controlled your power. This is a valuable skill. She gave him a single, sharp nod, the highest form of praise he was likely to ever get from her, and walked away. A moment later, Rocket came over and tossed a small, metallic object into his lap. It was a perfectly machined power converter. Your little energy fits fried the one in the food dispenser. Made this so it won't happen again. He grumbled, refusing to make eye contact. Wasn't a bad plan, for a bleeding heart. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. Deku felt a tiny, fragile flicker of connection to this bizarre, dysfunctional crew. He hadn't compromised his core beliefs. He had protected life, and in doing so, he had earned a sliver of their respect. It wasn't home, but for the first time, it felt a little less like he was completely alone. He didn't know that on the other side of the galaxy, his actions had not gone unnoticed. In a darkened trophy room aboard a Predator-class starship, a being known as Krylo the Huntsman reviewed a recent intelligence report from one of his informants on Nowhere. Krylo was a collector, but not of objects. He collected unique, powerful lifeforms. His walls were adorned with the stuffed heads of rare beasts, with creatures frozen in carbonite, with the skeletons of the last of their kind. The report was flagged as high priority. It detailed a chaotic scene at the Gilded Nebula Casino, orchestrated by the Guardians of the Galaxy, but it wasn't Quill's antics or Gamera's efficiency that caught his eye. It was the description of their new, unknown associate. Subject appeared Terran, adolescent male. Clad in green. Displayed abilities of extreme energy projection and generation of black, tendril-like appendages. Power output was sufficient to overload localized energy systems. Utilized abilities with tactical, non-lethal precision. A completely unknown biological signature. Krylo leaned forward, his multifaceted eyes gleaming in the low light of the display. Terrans were common, worthless. But one with the power of a star. One that was undocumented, unregistered, and utterly unique? That was not a specimen. That was a centerpiece for his collection. He tapped a button on his armrest, his voice a low, predatory rasp that echoed through the room. Set a course for the last known coordinates of the vessel Benatar, he commanded. And find me everything you can on this green comet. I want it. Alive. In the silent, endless gulf between stars, time became a fluid concept. For Izuku Midoriya, the days, or what the ship's chronometer designated as cycles, began to blur into a strange new routine. The acute, soul-crushing agony of his displacement had not vanished, but it had receded from a roaring inferno to a deep, constant ache in his chest. It was a wound that wouldn't close, but one he was learning to live with. He was a castaway, but he was no longer a passenger. After Nowhere, something had shifted. He was now an anomaly to be managed, a weapon to be sharpened, and most surprisingly, a project to be undertaken by the galaxy's most dysfunctional family. The decision was made, as most were on the Benatar, in the middle of a loud, chaotic argument in the ship's common area. He nearly got us all killed! Rocket's voice was a high-pitched shriek of indignation, though it lacked its usual venom. He was gesturing wildly with a hydra spanner, and then he saved our butts with a flick of his finger. The kid is a walking contradiction. He's a tactical nuke with the emotional stability of a pubescent goblin. We can't just let him wander around the ship waiting for the next thing to go boom. Rocket is correct, Drax rumbled, nodding sagely as he meticulously cleaned one of his knives. His power is mighty, yet his form is fragile, like a baby Glasmorphian, whose adorable squeals can shatter Durasteel. He must be taught to control his squeals. The point, Gamora cut in, her voice slicing through the noise with its usual authority, is that he is a powerful but untrained asset. Nowhere, he demonstrated tactical thinking, but he is still a liability. To himself, and to us. If he is to remain on this ship, he needs to learn our way of fighting. Quill, who had been leaning back in his chair with his feet up, listening to the debate with a smirk, finally spoke. I agree. The kid's got heart, and he's definitely got the punch, but he's all plus ultra and no finesse. He fights like he's got a spare body in the closet. He looked over at Deku, who had been sitting quietly through the discussion about his own future, feeling like a science experiment being evaluated. So, what do you say, Deku? You want to learn how to be a guardian of the galaxy? Deku looked at the faces around him. A genetically engineered raccoon with an attitude problem, a literal-minded destroyer, the deadliest woman in the galaxy, and a charming man-child from an Earth that wasn't his. This was nothing like the structured, methodical training of Yue Hai. It was going to be chaotic, dangerous, and probably insane, but it was also the first time they had truly included him. Okay, he said, a flicker of his old, determined fire returning to his eyes. I'll do it, Quill grinned. Excellent. Lesson 1 starts now. Cargo Bay. Don't be late. Lesson 1, The Rhythm of the Void with Peter Quill. The cargo bay of the Benatar was a large, cavernous space, filled with crates, spare parts, and the lingering scent of engine grease. When Deku arrived, he found Quill standing in the center of the room, tinkering with a panel on the wall. A familiar, upbeat melody with a driving bass line was playing from a small speaker system. All right, kid, welcome to 0G101, Quill said, not looking up from his work. Out here, you're not always gonna have solid ground under your feet. A firefight can happen anywhere, in an asteroid field, during a hull breach, on the outside of a Kree warship. You need to know how to move. With a final tap on the panel, he sealed it and turned to Deku with a flourish. And that's why. I'm turning off the gravity. Before Deku could react, a low hum filled the room and the subtle, ever-present pull on his body vanished. He gasped as his feet lifted from the deck. He flailed instinctively, his Yue training screaming at him to find his footing, but there was none to be found. He began to drift slowly towards the ceiling, tumbling end over end. Quill, on the other hand, was perfectly at home. He tapped the sides of his boots, and with a hiss of compressed air, he jetted across the room, banking and weaving with the effortless grace of a dragonfly. He did a slow, upside-down loop around Deku's flailing form. See? It's all about controlled thrust, Quill said, his voice casual. You gotta stop thinking in 2 dimensions. There is no up or down. There's only where you are, and where you wanna be. Deku's mind was racing. Okay, think. Aizawa-sensei's lessons on environmental awareness. Float. He activated the quirk, but it felt strange here. Float was about negating gravity's pull. With no gravity to negate, it was more like a gentle, directionless push. He managed to arrest his tumble, but he was still just floating. A sitting duck. You got that floaty thing you do, right? Quill asked, hovering in front of him. Try using that. Deku focused, pushing a gentle stream of energy downwards. He slowly began to drift upwards, then tried to angle it to move sideways. The result was a clumsy, wobbling trajectory that was anything but combat-ready. Quill sighed. No. You're too stiff. You're fighting it. It's like dancing. You gotta feel the rhythm. He gestured to the music. You hear that? That's the beat. You gotta move with it. Be loose. To demonstrate, Quill jetted off again, his movements perfectly timed to the song's catchy chorus. Deku watched, a mix of frustration and awe welling up inside him. Quill made it look so easy, so natural. Deku's own movements were born of desperation and raw power. They were jagged, explosive, and anything but graceful. "It's not working," Deku said, managing to stop himself by grabbing onto a support beam. "My quirk isn't for propulsion, it's for lift, so adapt," Quill said simply. He unholstered one of his quad blasters and fired a low-power bolt that ricocheted off the far wall. Enemy fire. "What do you do?" Deku's instincts took over. He let go of the beam, trying to push himself away with float, but he was too slow. He imagined the bolt hitting him, the failure. Then, another quirk, one that was more instinct than thought, answered his call. Black Whip. A tendril of dark energy shot from his arm, not as an attack, but as a grappling line. It latched onto a cargo container on the other side of the bay. He pulled. The sudden acceleration yanked him sideways, swinging him in a wide, fast arc. It was disorienting and uncontrolled, and he slammed into the wall with a loud clang. He groaned, but a spark of an idea had ignited in his mind. He pushed off the wall and let himself drift into the center of the bay. Quill watched, a curious eyebrow raised. "Again," Deku said. Quill fired another bolt. This time, Deku was ready. He used float to give himself a slight upward push, just enough to change his vertical position. At the same time, he shot out two tendrils of Black Whip. One latched onto the ceiling, the other onto the floor. He pulled on both simultaneously, anchoring himself in midair for a split second. Then he released the floor tendril and used the ceiling one as a pivot point, swinging himself behind a large crate in a fluid, spider-like movement. Quill's eyes widened. He fired 3 more bolts in quick succession. Deku didn't try to dodge. He became a whirlwind of motion. Float for subtle shifts, Black Whip for rapid, powerful relocation. He used the tendrils like extra limbs, pushing, pulling, and swinging his way through the cargo bay. He wasn't as fast or as elegant as Quill, but he was unpredictable, moving in ways that defied conventional physics. He was a green and black comet, ricocheting through the zero-gravity environment. He came to a stop, panting, hovering in the middle of the room, held in place by 2 taut lines of Black Whip. He hadn't landed a single blow on Quill, but he hadn't been hit, either. He had survived. He had adapted. Quill lowered his blaster, a slow, impressed grin spreading across his face. "Huh," he said, nodding. "Not bad, kid. Not bad at all. You're still a mess, but you're a creative mess. We can work with that." He turned the gravity back on, and Deku dropped to the floor, landing in a crouch. "Just remember," Quill added, pointing a finger at him. "It's all about the rhythm." Lesson 2, The Weight of a Blow with Gamora. If Quill's training was a dance, Gamora's was a dissection. She led Deku to the ship's small, designated training room, a simple space with padded walls and a reinforced floor. She carried no weapons. She didn't need them. "Your fight on Nowhere was effective but lucky," she began, her voice cold and analytical as she circled him. "You relied on overwhelming the opposition with a strategy they couldn't predict. Against a single, skilled opponent, that would not work. You are predictable. You are sloppy. Show me your fighting stance." Deku fell into the familiar posture of his shoot style, a balance form designed to channel one for all through his legs and minimize the strain on his arms. Gamora stopped in front of him. Pathetic. Before he could react, she moved. She was a green blur, a flash of motion so fast his danger sense barely had time to register it. She swept his legs out from under him, and he hit the mat with a surprised grunt. "Your stance is too wide," she said, looking down at him. "It broadcasts your intentions and leaves you vulnerable to sweeps. Get up." He scrambled to his feet, his cheeks burning with embarrassment. He'd faced villains, monsters, an army. He had never been so effortlessly defeated. "Your power is immense," she continued, her gaze piercing. "I have seen the readings. It is a tidal wave. But a tidal wave is useless against a surgeon's scalpel. You rely on it as a crutch. You believe that hitting harder is the solution to every problem. It is not. It is a sign of weakness." "Attack me?" Deku hesitated. "I don't want to hurt you." A flicker of something, annoyance, maybe even amusement, crossed her face. "You will not hurt me." He took a deep breath and charged. He didn't use a smash, just a controlled 5% burst to enhance his speed, aiming a kick at her midsection. She didn't dodge, she simply shifted her weight, and his foot slid off her hip. She used his own momentum against him, grabbing his arm, twisting, and in a single fluid motion, had him face down on the mat with his arm locked behind his back. The pressure was immense, a hair's breadth from snapping the bone. "You telegraph every major attack," she said calmly, her voice right next to his ear. "Your eyes flicker to your target a full second before you move. Your shoulders tense. You inhale. An enemy who knows how to read you will defeat you before you have even thrown your punch." She released him, and he pushed himself up, gasping. His arm throbbed. "Again," she commanded. For the next hour, it was the same. Every attack he launched, she parried, dodged, or reversed with humiliating ease. She was always a step ahead, her movements economical and brutally efficient. She pointed out every flaw, every wasted motion, every breath that was too loud. She was dismantling his fighting style, piece by piece, and showing him how hollow it was without the overwhelming force of a smash to back it up. He grew frustrated, the exhaustion and repeated failures wearing on him. He saw an opening, or what he thought was an opening, and the familiar, reckless impulse surged through him. Just a little more power, a 15% smash. She can't dodge that. The green lightning began to crackle around his fist. He drew his arm back, the air pressure beginning to shift around him. "Don't!" Gamera's voice was suddenly ice. He froze, the power still thrumming under his skin. "That is your weakness," she said, her eyes narrowed. "That impulse. The belief that more power is the answer. Every time you do that, you break your own body. You sacrifice your future for a single, momentary victory. That is the philosophy of a fool, not a warrior. A true warrior values his weapon. He does not shatter it on the first enemy he sees. Your body is your weapon. And you treat it like disposable ordnance." Her words hit him harder than any of her physical blows. She was right. He thought of his scars, of the dozens of times Recovery Girl had warned him, of the future Sir Knight I had foreseen. He was always breaking himself, always walking that razor's edge. The power in his fist subsided. He let out a shaky breath, his frustration giving way to a grudging respect. "How?" he asked, his voice quiet. "How do I fight without breaking, you think?" she said simply. "You stop trying to overwhelm and you start to outmaneuver. You use the minimal amount of force necessary to achieve your objective. Your analytical abilities are your greatest asset, not your raw power. You proved that on Nowhere. Now prove it to me." He looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. Not as an alien, or an assassin, but as a teacher. A harsh one, but a teacher nonetheless. He took a breath, fell back into his stance, and began again. This time, he didn't charge. He watched. He analyzed. He looked for the patterns in her movements, the subtle shifts of her weight. He feinted a kick, and as she moved to counter, he used the tiny, controlled 3% burst from his fist, not aimed at her, but at the mat beside her. The small shockwave was just enough to force her to take a half step to steady herself. It was a minuscule opening, one that vanished in a nanosecond, but it was the first time in the entire session that he had dictated her movement. He still ended up on the floor a moment later, but as he lay there, panting, he saw her give the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. "Better," she said. For Deku, it felt like a greater victory than landing a 100% smash. Lesson 3. The Philosophy of Battle with Drax. Deku found Drax in the mess hall, polishing his knives with a terrifyingly cheerful focus. He approached the large man cautiously. "Drax-san? Quill-san said you were going to teach me something?" Drax looked up, and his face split into a wide grin. "Ah, the small, green warrior. Yes. Quill and Gamora teach you how to move and strike. I shall teach you what truly matters. I will teach you how to be a warrior." Deku sat down opposite him, intrigued. A lecture on warrior philosophy could be insightful. Perhaps it would be like the lessons on Bushido he had read about. "The first, and most important, lesson of battle," Drax began, leaning forward with great solemnity, "is the battle cry. You must roar your intentions to the heavens. It strikes terror into the hearts of your enemies, and makes your allies swell with courage. He demonstrated, letting out a deafening roar that made the metal plates on the table vibrate. Rag. Now you, Deku blinked. A battle cry, yes. What do you scream as you charge into the fray? Well, Deku said, thinking. Usually I'm just screaming a name, like Manchester Smash, or something. Drax looked deeply disappointed. No, no, no! That is merely a label for your attack. It does not speak of your spirit. You must proclaim your purpose. For instance, when I fought the obelisk, I bellowed, I will now sever your tentacles and feed them to the Zarglian hog beast that I will slay next. The obelisk was so terrified, it nearly vomited on me. But wouldn't that give away your strategy? Deku asked, genuinely confused. Of course. Drax boomed. The fear comes from knowing their demise is inevitable, even when they know how it will happen. It is the ultimate display of confidence. Deku tried to imagine himself doing that. Yelling, Villain! I will now use a 5% smash to break your guard and then capture you with Black Whip in accordance with Japanese hero law. The idea was so absurd he almost laughed. I don't think my style works like that, Deku said politely. My mentor, All Might, taught me that a hero's job is to make people feel safe. To smile, to reassure them. Not to terrify villains. Drax stroked his chin, considering this with intense gravity. Ah. I see. His is a strange and silent method of warfare. His smile is his battle cry. A silent promise of the brutal annihilation he is about to unleash. This All Might is a very subtle and terrifying man. The conversation continued in this vein for some time. Drax attempted to teach Deku the art of the intimidating stare, which made Deku look like he needed to use the restroom, the proper way to list an enemy's weaknesses to their face, and the importance of never, ever letting a metaphor go by without taking it literally. The lesson concluded with Drax clapping a hand on Deku's shoulder. A gesture that nearly drove the boy through the floor. You are a strange warrior, Izuku Midoriya, Drax declared. You do not boast. You do not roar. Your spirit is quiet. But I have seen you fight. It is the quiet stream that hides the crushing depths. You will do well. Deku walked away from the lesson more confused than when he had started, but with the distinct feeling that he had somehow, in some bizarre way, made a friend. Lesson 4. The Science of Survival with Rocket. Deku's final training session was in Rocket's workshop, which was really just the med bay, now so cluttered with half-finished inventions and scavenged tech that it looked like a bomb had gone off in an electronics store. All right, get on the slab, chosen one, Rocket said without looking up from a datapad he was furiously manipulating. And don't touch anything. I just recalibrated my gravimetric splicer, and if you breathe on it wrong, you might turn inside out. Deku cautiously sat on the edge of the diagnostic bed. Unlike the others, Rocket's interest in him was purely scientific. Since they'd rescued him, Rocket had been running low-level scans, trying to decipher the mystery of One for All. Your power is a logistical nightmare, Rocket began, finally turning to face him. He gestured at a holographic display showing a complex energy schematic that was clearly meant to be Deku. It's not just the output, which is ridiculous. It's the feedback. Every time you use a smash, a wave of kinetic energy travels back up your limbs. Your bones are dense, yeah, from being broken and healed a million times, which is its own brand of crazy, by the way. But there's a limit. You keep this up, and you're gonna turn your arms into sacks of wet gravel. Permanently, Deku nodded grimly. I know. I've been trying to mitigate it with my shoot style. Yeah, cute, but kicking everything isn't a long-term solution. Rocket interrupted. What you need is better hardware. He hopped off his stool and scurried over to a workbench, rummaging through a pile of metal plates and wires. Your costume is a joke. What is this, spandex and wishful thinking? The armor plates are basic Iron Age tech. For the next few hours, Rocket worked, chattering the entire time. He peppered Deku with questions, not about heroism or spirit, but about conductivity, energy transference, and tensile strength. To Rocket's surprise, Deku kept up. He might not have understood the alien technology, but he understood the principles. He talked about the support items Mei Hatsum had built for him, about the theories behind his costume upgrades. A rapid-fire, high-level nerd dialogue developed between the boy and the raccoon. For the first time, they weren't a hero and a cynic. They were two gearheads geeking out over cool tech. Finally, Rocket stepped back from the workbench, gesturing with a proud sweep of his paw. "Behold," he declared. "The Deku Mark II Survival Suite. My own design mostly." On the bench was a collection of new and upgraded gear. His familiar red gauntlets had been reinforced and rebuilt. They were bulkier, lined with what Rocket called kinetic feedback dampeners scavenged from a Kree shock baton. "It won't absorb everything," Rocket explained, "but it should take the edge off a 20 to 30% smash, turn a compound fracture into a hairline. Maybe." His mask had been integrated with a state-of-the-art rebreather, and a new HUD that could link directly to the Benatar's systems. "Good for 20 minutes in a hard vacuum, and it'll stop you from breathing in alien fungi that make your lungs liquefy," Rocket said casually. Finally, there were stabilizers for his iron-soled boots, designed to magnetize to metallic surfaces and provide better traction in zero-G, or on unstable surfaces. Deku stared at the new gear, his eyes wide. Rocket hadn't just fixed his equipment, he had improved it, tailored it specifically to his needs, to his quirk. It was the kind of personalized, thoughtful work he'd only ever gotten from me. "This is incredible," Deku breathed, picking up one of the gauntlets. It felt solid, powerful. "Thank you, Rocket." Rocket just grunted, turning away to hide the fact that he was pleased. "Yeah, well, it's mostly so you don't break yourself and I have to put you back together. It's a pain, and it's definitely so you don't blow up my ship again." He paused, looking at the energy readings on his screen one last time. "I still don't get how you do it. This whole sacred torch thing is bunk. There's a quantum energy exchange happening in your cells that just shouldn't be possible." He shrugged. "But this should help you do it without killing yourself. Try not to scratch it." It was the closest thing to an "I care about you" that Deku figured he was ever going to get from the raccoon. He slipped the gauntlets on. They fit perfectly. That evening cycle, the Benatar was quiet. Deku stood in the cockpit, looking out at the stardusted velvet of space. He was sore in muscles he didn't know he had. His mind was buzzing with new tactics, new philosophies, new possibilities. He flexed his hands, feeling the solid weight of Rocket's new gauntlets. He was still millions of light years from home. He was still lost. But as he stood there, watching the nebulae drift by, he felt a change in himself. He was being reforged in this strange, chaotic crucible. Quill had taught him to dance in the void. Gamora had taught him the value of control. Drax had taught him to be himself, in a weird roundabout way. And Rocket had given him the tools to survive. His unwavering plus-ultra spirit, the burning core of his being that he'd inherited from All Might, was still there. But it was being shaped, tempered by the roguish, pragmatic, and fiercely loyal spirit of the Guardians of the Galaxy. They were a mess. They were thieves and killers and loudmouths. But as Groot toddled over and handed him a small, glowing flower that had sprouted from his own arm, Deku realized with a startling clarity that they were also, in their own broken way, heroes. And maybe, just maybe, he was becoming one of them.